start again. I'm going to show you about 3 minutes from here, and then about 3-4 minutes from the next section here. This is a film that's available on basically anywhere. It was also made slightly before it showed at the Belgian International Film Festival, and it was part of a school program. Okay, and that year I was invited in to talk with the schools. So there would be like 500 high school students who were watching this film, and then there was a question and answer afterwards. Okay, and by that time I already knew this case, so I knew a lot about behind this stuff. But there's no point in trying to transmit it to high school students because the relevance is, the frame of reference is different than ours, so I had to do it in another way. But take a look at how polarized it can get. So we go about 3 minutes. It ends with an infographic kind of thing.
Has never been a factor for BC in terms of a siting decision. That's fair comment, isn't it?
I couldn't really say because...
What about you, Mr. Swartfigger? Can you think of a site that's ever been rejected by the federal government because of its impacts on wild salmon and migratory routes?
No, I can't.
At least 10 fish farms approved right in the narrowest channel of the Discovery Passage, the narrowest place the wild salmon migrate to. Was that risk considered when they were approved?
Wild fish get infections. I'm no expert in fish health, but my belief is wild fish get infections, whether as part of the natural course of fish being in the natural environment.
TFO, are they in a conflict of interest? Yeah, I think they're in a serious conflict of interest. They have to, by their mandate, they're supposed to protect wild fish, and by their political masters, they're supposed to support the development of an aquaculture industry.
In the final days of the inquiry, Justice Cohen called on DFO's Dr. Christy Miller to testify about her findings. For the first time, the public would have a chance to hear Miller speak about her discovery, since her gag order had been imposed.
What you found is some sort of new virus.
They had imposed a gag order on her. It's not specific to Miller, and by gag order that means you're not allowed to speak directly to the public or to a journalist. It's not specific to her. It's a blanket position that the Canadian federal government had begun to use on federal Canadian scientists. That means publicly employed Canadian scientists. This is now an election issue now in Canada. Public access to publicly funded science. So just so you know, the implication that this is only on her is incorrect.
Your leading suspect was salmon leukemia virus.
Yes, it was.
And if in fact that's the case, this in fact may be the smoking gun for the 2009 declines.
It could be the smoking gun.
She's doing some fantastic work under very difficult conditions, and in conditions where she says she's been intimidated by her managers for reporting on health issues around wild salmon. She felt intimidated about the potential loss of her data if she went public. She felt intimidated in terms of her budget, and so that was extremely revealing.
So while all this was happening, Dr. Rick Rutledge was very worried about the Rivers Inlet sockeye because they were in an unexplained decline, a lot like the Fraser sockeye.
I had no idea as to why the numbers were so low. I tried to think as the season was winding down what on earth the cause might be. It had to be something new, I thought, because it hadn't happened before as far as I could tell. So I eventually sent some samples in for testing.
I remember when you called me, it was a dark October night, and he said to me, Alex, are you sitting down? It was like he was going to tell me that someone we knew had died. And he said the test came back positive for ISA virus in Rivers Inlet smolts. I was devastated. I thought, okay, 20 years of trying to prevent this industry from destroying the wild salmon of Canada, and I have failed. Salmon influenza, ISA virus. most lethal known salmon virus worldwide caused $2 billion worth of damage in Chile. No country wants it. It has spread everywhere in the world where Atlantic salmon are being raised in pens in large numbers by the Norwegian companies.
ISA, infectious salmon anemia, the most lethal known salmon virus worldwide. It was first detected in Norway in 1984. At first, the virus seemed benign, but once it incubated in the salmon farms, it mutated into highly virulent and lethal strains, which can kill millions of fish at a time. These deadly strains of ISA spread to new countries by way of egg imports. The industry farms mainly Atlantic salmon, so they must import Atlantic salmon eggs from Europe into the country in which they are operating their farms. When the ISA virus wiped out 70% of Chile's salmon industry, the strain was traced back to Norway.
That's that paper.
The difference between Chile and BC, though, is that Chile has no native salmon, whereas BC has much to lose. With DFO's reference lab, and all labs that had tested for the ISA virus were invited to speak at the Cohen Commission's ISA hearings. Dr. Fred Kabenji, based on Prince Edward Island, heads up one of only 2 world reference labs for ISA. Dr. Art Nyland from Norway, considered to be one of the world's experts on ISA. Dr. Christy Miller, head of the genomics lab for DFO. And Dr. Nellie Gagne, DFO's reference lab, and the lab used by the CFIA to test for ISA.
When Nell Gagne, who did the test for them, actually went on the stand, she said she had gotten weak positives, and for her, the results were inconclusive.
Were your RT-PCR results inconclusive?
We reported them as inconclusive, and in this case, all samples submitted showed extensive to total degradation of RNA.
And the problem was the samples were so degraded. You know, now, a year after...
Ashes, what were your results? Did you obtain any positive RT-PCR tests for ISAB in those samples that you tested?
Among the first 48, I had 1 positive.
In that testing, we found 2 positive samples out of 48.
We did indeed obtain ISA sequence.
There's only one lab that didn't find it, and that was the reference lab for DFO in Moncton. And you know, it turns out they were sampling a totally different segment from everyone else who actually found the ISA virus. And you know, we've got 3 or 4 labs that are finding it, and one that's a government lab that's not. You know, you have to pause and wonder what's going on, whether they really do want to find it or not.
Okay, so, you know, there's conspiracy theories here. This is publicly available. It was showing here in Bergen. The environmental groups actually made an extra showing of that up at Eggit, and they knew half the people in the audience. Cermak was there, Marine Harvest was there, a couple of other companies were there, just in case. And it was a big deal. This goes everywhere. And I agree with Evan. I don't like it. I mean, it's scientifically weak. It also does not mention the conclusions of the Cohen Commission. It implies that the Cohen Commission is in agreement with them, and it's not. So there are quite a number of things that go on here, and they take the Vik et al. For given genotype match, and they use it and keep going further. So this is the way things sort of start to spin out. And by the way, they were looking at, originally they were looking at the decline of the salmon in the Fraser River. A couple of years later, they had record amounts. So there's quite a lot more to be said there. And of course, the so-called smoking gun of ISA has not been validated in that case. So, we have a lot of things here. And just because this is an unusual exercise and an unusual way of looking at the effects of a paper, I'd like to hear your opinions about this. And just to start it, make it like a 1 minute, talk with people beside you, think about what it is you have seen from this little exercise, this week that you haven't seen in other times and other aspects. So take a minute or two, talk to each other, and then we'll go.
Karen? We don't understand.
Oh, basically, what have you learned? What have you found out
This exercise?
from this, from like this week's exercise? Yeah. Huh? Yeah. Anything else? Any other questions you want? Yeah, anything else?
People can be afraid of saying things because of consequences.
Yeah.
And that money has a big.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Okay. What else have we got? What else did you learn? Yes.
It's scary to be a little student against the big industry.
Yes.
You need to know what you're taking on, I guess.
Yeah. Yes.
I thought it was quite good that there was committees like this who can protect scientists against kind of big industry. And, but I was a little bit unsure if their conclusion kind of green-lighted the scientists' results, or if it just said that they're fit to be scientists. So
That's actually a very good point. Yeah. So the ethics committee sort of keeps the ethics there, but doesn't necessarily validate the results. It says ethically this paper was okay. Doesn't necessarily validate the results. And you're saying protecting the scientists.
yeah, I found in this text with their conclusion and the case and all that, that it said that at least after our conclusion we shouldn't in any way attack the scientists or criticize them. We should be very careful with that because we're kind of vitvaske.
Yeah, whitewash.
Yeah, we whitewashed them, so, and they've been under a lot of pressure, so no, it's their time to.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else?
Yeah. Hilde and Gudny brought up a good point that with in papers such as VK, I'm pointing you, it's not you guys, still in debate. In papers such as VK's or in other discipline, authors are often content with, oh, this is written as is convention, as a standard in these papers in our field. But sometimes it's just not good enough. You have to, even though it's a standard way of writing something up, it should still be perfected.
You should really think about what the validity of all of it.
A paper needs to be transparent and everything needs to be understood from just that one paper.
Right.
And sometimes convention is just not good enough.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, exactly. Convention isn't good enough. I heard you all talking, so I can pick on any of it. Yeah.
Like Sarah was saying earlier, it's funny how like one little paper, one little evidence can be twisted by all parties to kind of fit what they believe is true.
Or what they fear is true, yes. Yeah. And in fact, you saw, even in the film, they used that one paper, genotype match, and that was like, it was sort of blankly assumed to be the real evidence. Yeah, yeah.
Well, I think we can't when there is some severe result, we can't conceal the result, and we should take immediate measures to cope with it.
So that if you have a serious result,
for example, this the ISA in Canada, I think when I read other papers about this, some for example DFO and other components may be conceal the result except some professors. We shouldn't just conceal it. We should take measures immediately.
Right. So it's hard though if your results are small and you say this means that there's vertical transmission, but you're dealing with an industry. It's very hard to take a measure because it affects the industry right away, and so it can be very complex. Anybody else want to say anything? Yes.
I would say the messenger is being shot.
Ah.
So don't shoot the messenger.
Yeah.
Because
Right.
scientists are like the messengers, they follow the principles, and there are these companies which has huge money, and there is also political perspective behind it.
Right.
So it's a kind of complex situation to be a scientist. So
It is. It is. And it's not always going to be clear either. Who's the good guys and who's the bad?
the messenger must be protected.
Yeah, that's sort of the whistleblower act. And of course, that's also because whistleblowers are often attacked first, rather than, because the messengers or the whistleblowers, it's an exposed position where you're pointing to something that is important, but nobody else has decided to act on, and so on. And whether or not you shoot the messenger is a legitimate question. Very often, you're quite right, the messenger is shot, or at least shot at. Yes. And so there are consequences for saying something like this that goes against convention. So convention may not be good enough.
One thing I find interesting is about media as well. If you have someone who does the whistleblowing and then it turns out they're wrong,
yes,
the media love trashing those people again afterwards.
Yes.
They love it.
Like, yes.
So frustrating.
Yeah, and media can be turned one way or the other. Yeah, and that's a really hard part. I do not know how to work a media thing, a media spin around that. But that's also why people hire what's called spin doctors to try and turn a story in the media to their favor. And it's really difficult. Yeah.
Well, we also talked about, it follows on Bruce's point, about this precautionary principle.
Yeah.
That it seems to be applied in certain scientific fields and in certain decision-making areas, but in a case study like this, there was no mention of it whatsoever.
No.
So you think there should be some thorough environmental impact assessments and prove that this broodstock doesn't have ISA.
Right.
And then don't export it until proven otherwise.
Right. And that is what you ended up doing, isn't it? Remember?
And now they say they have all sorts of control. We don't know what they did.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
now they say they screen everything.
Right. And the FHF, they didn't fund a big study about that. They focused on other diseases right away. Yeah. So there's that aspect too. You know, they could have done something else. University of Bergen could have done something else. And it also goes back down to the simple writing of the paper. Yeah. And how big it spun out. And it was immensely interesting to watch this unfold. And when Siri finally defended her doctorate thesis, you know, there was, the opponents were aware of this aspect, but they focused on the other papers as well. And the other papers were, of course, very solidly done. And she got her doctorate and is now working in the industry again. But it was really, really difficult. So for those of you who are heading for a doctorate, you know, remember this. Remember that, you know, the institutions may survive, but the individuals might not. And the role of making your own critical thinking is really, really important. Because the stuff that you're going to be working on is getting closer to having real life big impacts. And some of you will be working on questions of global impact, and some of you will be working on questions of commercial impact, or of principal importance. And, you know, it's really hard. It's really hard to foresee the consequences of what you write when you write it. But think of those 21 questions and apply them to your own work. Because somebody else is going to be asking those 21 questions too. And you can see how things can spin out in an enormously global way and come back and haunt you forever on the internet, by the way. Yeah. So, yeah, that was basically the point of this exercise. The ethics in here are really complex. There's both the research fraud and how somehow they self-cited, minor detail, but that was okay. And then there's the other things that come on. And those are often of much greater consequence and impact on the people who are granting money for your research, who are steering focus in one way or another, or who are trying to make a living out of doing good science and rearing the product of those good science. So there's no obvious bad guy in here. Everybody had their own interests. There's no obvious bad guy. It's spun out of control. And it's really hard to say. Does anybody here want to point at a bad guy? Is there really a bad guy? That's hard. Is there a good guy? You guys, right? Yeah. Right. Okay. So that's about it for today. And on Monday oh, by the way, I'm in the process of doing your results and discussion. Next week, I'm gone from Tuesday till Friday, so there's other things on your schedule. So Knut on Wednesday, and then you're supposed to be meeting with your TAs, except for the obvious problem. From Friday. Yeah, right, I know. And also, anybody here who plays an instrument, would you come down and talk with me as we finish the break? Anybody who plays an instrument, has been in a band, or something like that, come and talk to me now. Okay. Yes?
Can I just ask one question before
Absolutely.
we kind of end this things? Like, you've been doing this business now since the dinosaurs died almost.
Yeah.
But like, have you been or published something like you thought like, okay, this is bankers, what happened and thing, it suddenly start fuzzing up like in some way?
Yes.
You have been there?
Yes.
Even though like this is a huge case.
This is a huge case.
Locally it's like nothing, to start a fire is really easy.
It really is, yes, it really is. And I'll take the easy part. I remember I told you that I was working in halibut, okay? So there's an international halibut industry still today, and I was at the beginning of it. And there was a guru in marine fish larval research, Blackstone, and he had already published something about the early life history of these fish. And I didn't read it until after we'd done the field study. And I described and we wrote and we drew pictures of and such of the early life from when they hatch to past first feeding, okay? So fish larvae have to hatch, then they have to eat, and then they turn into what looks like the fish afterwards in metamorphosis, okay? And so I was doing this stuff out at Austevoll, and we drew, because I was drawing through the microscope and all that, we drew different stages, and I figured what is normal is what turns up most often in one form or another. And there was this one, and I called it a deformity, and for those who work with it, gapers, because I could see that the jaws were not forming on all of them in the same way, and this deformity was coming up in various forms in one way or another, and it was meaning that the jaws couldn't close on food items, even though they were using up their yolk sac, which means that they would die. And so I described this as a dead end in developmental research there, and which would also lead to you misidentifying the source of mortality as, say, the first feed item, as in you fed them something wrong, and fish larvae would rather die than eat something they don't like. So you could focus, if you wanted to, on the feed items, but I was saying, no, this is a deformity, and the right way for them to develop is this way, and then they will eat. And of course, the first time I presented this in public, Blackster was right there. And I thought to myself, I'm going to get killed. Because, but no, I presented it in a neutral way. This is what the data say. But before I had gotten to that point, I've been saying, look, you're rearing deformed larvae here. It's never going to work. it's 80% deformed larvae in all these tanks. It's a waste of effort. Just saying that got me a shitload of work and problems because I'm coming out with a message they don't want to deal with. And that was a minor thing at a station. Just saying that. And because it had previously been described as normal by a guru in the field. But I was right, and I knew I was right. But I had to present it in a neutral way, with Blackstone right there. And he came to the lab afterwards, and it was fine. The one whose publication I was contradicting knew that I knew I was contradicting it, and I was trying to do it in a proper way. And he knew that what he had seen was what he had seen, and he'd only reported what he had seen. And there are different ways for fish to develop. So scientifically, there wasn't a problem. Politically, there was. And so that was the, oh, yeah, I have a temper. So yes, and it can hit you very early as well, yeah. And it can hit you in many ways. Right now I'm working on, as some of the students know here, I'm working on a new way that measures the immune system. And it also affects the way that you look at the salmon louse infestation. And it's changing how you frame that question. And well aware of things like this, I'm careful about what message I put out and exactly how it is and how well documented we put that message there. Because there's going to be people who say, ah, but this, oh, but that, and so on. And I'm saying, we're complimentary. Let's see what it looks like. So yeah, it happens all the time, and it's not. It's usually not a problem at the early stages when you're talking scientist to scientist, but when you get it spinning out of control, then it gets involved with emotions and money, particularly, and political agendas, and grants, and future programs, and this and that. And so, my little point of view, which I think is very well founded, of course, because it's my point of view, will be disagreed with by others. And that's why you have to sort of think about how you're packaging that message. Because as a Canadian media researcher said, the medium is the message. And so how are you packaging that? Are you making it easy? Are you making it easy to swallow? Are you putting it solidly? Are you putting it emotionally? Are you putting it on the basis of ethics? That's it? Okay. Thanks for today, and see you on Monday. Okay.